was 6 when my father decided the light in our old house wasn't enough. He said the trees needed space, that roots were choking under concrete. We moved before the season changed, before I learned what kind of silence a new house could hold. The street bent away from the sun. The property sat lower than the road, its roofline buried in shadow even at noon. There was a yard, wide and green, and a house that seemed to lean back from anyone who looked too long. The windows were narrow, framed with wood swollen from rain. When we first arrived, the air smelled of dust and fertilizer, the kind my father used when he was happiest. Neighbors said nothing. They watched. Someone had left a ceramic bird on the fence, its beak cracked clean off. I remember the sound the gate made, metal that hadn't moved in years. It didn't squeal. It inhaled. My mother walked through the rooms first, counting aloud. 1 for the kitchen, 2 for the bedrooms, 1 for prayer or guests or whatever we'd never have. Her voice thinned as she reached the end of the hall. The walls there were colder, painted the same white but dulled as if touched by wet hands. My father stood outside marking the soil with his boot heel, tracing invisible squares where the garden would be. He talked about pine, about rows of azalea, about the way wind should move around a house. He never mentioned the way it stopped. The first week smelled of fresh paint and soap. The second smelled of something underneath, old water, metal, an odor that didn't belong to us. My mother boiled vinegar and herbs on the stove, the way people do when they don't believe in anything but still want to be safe. At night I listened to the yard breathe. The sprinklers clicked though no one had turned them on. Sometimes it was only one, short bursts like someone tapping a spoon against glass. If I stayed awake long enough, I could hear the water fall into the same patch of grass again and again until it sounded like a clock stuck on 1 second. One evening, my father planted the first pine. He pressed his hand flat on the soil, nodded once, and went inside. When the wind came, the branches didn't move. I kept drawing spread on the living room floor, copying the shapes of things I could see through the window. Trees, fences, the back of my mother's dress as she moved in the kitchen. The house carried sound in strange ways. You could hear a whisper from the far end, but not a shout from the stairs. The night she fell, I remember the difference. A dull shift in the air. Not a crash, just a single heavy movement, like furniture deciding to breathe. I didn't turn at first. The silence after was thick enough to taste. When I finally looked, she was on the tiles, one arm bent, one leg under the table. Her eyes were open, but they didn't find me. They fixed on something else, something higher, maybe behind me. I called her name, but the sound folded back into my throat. Outside, the wind rose, dragging soil against the glass doors. My father's pine bent once, then straightened as if nothing had touched it. I ran to the fence, screamed for help until my voice slipped out of rhythm with the rest of the night. A neighbor came running, shoes half on, rubber gloves still wet from dishes. She lifted my mother as if she weighed nothing. Even then, my mother's eyes stayed open, red around the edges, watching me over the neighbor's shoulder. They followed us out the gate, across the street, through the light spilling from the clinic window. The doctors spoke in quick fragments. Heart, maybe nerves, maybe heat. They said she needed rest, observation, something to make her sleep. No one said why. When she woke a week later, her first words weren't mine or my father's. She said the house wasn't empty. Then she closed her eyes again. We brought her home anyway. The sheets smelled of bleach and something else, something from the ward that wouldn't leave. She stood in the doorway too long before stepping inside, as if the threshold had changed while she was gone. My father told her not to worry. He said the air just needed to move, that he'd open all the windows. He didn't notice that the curtains stayed still. At night, she left the lights on in every room. The yard looked like a shallow pool of yellow water. I watched her reflection move through it, a shape behind glass that didn't match her steps. Sometimes she paused at the kitchen sink and turned toward the hallway, listening. Sometimes she smiled, small and wrong. No one spoke about the day she fell. The floor was cleaned, the tiles replaced. Only I knew where her head had struck, the faint mark beneath the new glaze. I used to sit there when she wasn't looking, feeling the cold climb through the soles of my feet. Weeks passed. The smell returned. By then I could tell it apart from the garden, from the paint, from everything that belonged to us. It was older, heavier, like wet stone under sun. When I asked if anyone else noticed, my father said nothing, and my mother pressed a finger to her lips as if we were already being listened to. That night I woke to water again, the same tapping rhythm. The clock read the same minute twice. Through the window, the pine trees looked darker, almost black, as if they were holding their breath. I waited for the sprinklers to stop, but they didn't. They only slowed, counting down to something I couldn't see. The house began keeping time in its own way. Clocks would stall and start again, seconds folding in half. When I told my mother, she said she'd noticed the same thing, that the kitchen clock blinked twice before ticking forward, that her wristwatch lost minutes, but only when she was inside. She wrote down the difference every night, a list that grew longer and more uneven until the dates stopped lining up. My father worked later than before. He said the soil outside stayed too wet, that the drainage wasn't right, that the yard needed watching. Sometimes I saw him standing in the dark, the porch light behind him, a spade in his hand, though he never dug. He watched the ground as if waiting for it to breathe. Inside, the air thickened. Every door had its own weight. The hinges pressed back when you tried to open them. My mother cleaned constantly, bleach, vinegar, water boiled dry, until the smell clung to her hair. When she opened the windows, the curtains still refused to move. She said it was the wind's fault, not the house's. At dinner, the plates made a hollow sound. Even our voices bent around the walls. My sister coughed once, twice, then smiled like she didn't know she'd done it. A faint rash appeared along her wrists that night, red dots too small to name. She scratched until they bled. By morning, her arms were spotted like paper left in rain. Mother touched her forehead, said it felt hot, and called the clinic. They said to bring her in, routine, nothing urgent. We went. The hall smelled of plastic and new paint. Machines hummed, doctors whispered. My sister lay still. They took blood, asked questions, left, came back, asked again. No one said what was wrong. One of them told my mother that sometimes children react to change, the air, the dust, even the shape of a new room. Mother nodded, but her hands didn't stop shaking. They gave my sister pills she couldn't swallow. She bit down and spat the taste onto a tissue. Her tongue was red at the edges. At night she woke gasping, eyes wide but unfocused, the same way my mother's had been. The doctors called it stress. They always said, stress. After a week she walked again, slow but upright, her arms bandaged to keep from scratching. They said she was fine, that rest would help. We drove home with the windows open. Wind tangled her hair and carried the hospital smell out the car door. She didn't look back at the building. No one ever does. When we reached the house, she stopped on the front step. Her pupils widened. Her breathing slowed. She said the yard looked smaller, though nothing had moved. Father said it was just the shadows. I believed him until the lights flickered inside before we even turned the key. That night, Mother refused to sleep. She walked from room to room, checking corners. She said she heard water moving in the walls. Not a leak, just movement, like a slow heartbeat behind plaster. Father told her to lie down. She didn't. My sister started talking in her sleep. Not words at first, just fragments, breath shaped into vowels. The sound of someone answering a question they hadn't been asked. Sometimes she laughed. Sometimes she cried without waking. When she did wake, she asked why I'd been standing near the bed. I hadn't moved from the hallway. The smell came back stronger, not from the floor this time, but from the ceiling. Something metallic, faintly sweet. Father searched the attic and found nothing. He sealed the hatch anyway. He said mice could make a house feel haunted if you let them. Mother didn't argue. A week later, the heat broke. Rain came hard, drumming the roof until the gutters overflowed. We left the windows closed, but somehow water still found its way in. It pooled beneath the kitchen table where Mother had fallen. By morning it was gone, leaving the floor clean, too clean, as if something had licked it dry. My sister stayed in bed. The bandages on her arms darkened with moisture from inside, not outside. She whispered that she felt watched. She kept turning toward the mirror across from her bed, not to see herself but to check what stood behind her. There was never anything there when I looked. Still, she asked me to cover it. I used a towel, then a blanket, then finally pulled the mirror off the wall and turned it to face the floor. That seemed to calm her for a night. The next evening, while I sat in the hall, she screamed once, just once, and the light went out. By the time we reached her, she was shaking but awake, eyes open, staring at the door instead of us. She said someone had knocked. We hadn't heard it. Father installed a new lock that same night. The bolt clicked loud enough to wake the house. I counted how many times he turned it, how long the echo lasted down the hallway. Mother sat in the kitchen holding a cup she didn't drink from. Her lips moved, but no sound came. The next morning, the rash was gone. Her skin was pale and smooth, as if it had never been touched. She said she felt fine, that she wanted to go back to school. Mother smiled too quickly. Father said good. The house stayed silent through breakfast, as if it was listening to us pretend. That afternoon, the rain started again. A thin tapping from the attic followed, slow and steady. Father said it was the roof settling. I listened until I heard it pause. Then it began again, exactly where it had stopped. Mother called it a pulse. She wrote the time in her notebook. It matched the hour my sister had fallen sick the week before. She showed Father. He closed the book without looking. That night I woke to the smell of iron. The floor was cold under my feet. From the hallway I could see the kitchen door swinging open, then closed, though no air moved. The sound from the attic had stopped. Something else had started below. A faint rhythm under the tiles, like someone knocking from beneath the house, patient even, waiting to be answered. By the time my grandmother arrived, the house had stopped pretending to be new. Paint flaked near the baseboards, the grass grew uneven, and the smell under the floor had settled into everything we owned. She came with a suitcase the color of rust, and a voice that still believed in order. Her doctor had told her to rest. She said she'd rather do it where the family could see her. We carried her upstairs because she wanted light, though there was hardly any. The windows faced the trees my father had planted. They blocked more sun than they gave. She said the air felt thick, as if someone had been breathing in that room for years before we opened the door. Mother changed the sheets twice. The second set stayed damp. At night, Grandmother hummed old songs to herself. The melodies never finished. Between verses, she would stop and ask if anyone was standing near the door. We said no. Sometimes she believed us. She started keeping a small mirror beside her bed. Said it helped her sleep. I caught her tilting it toward the ceiling once, whispering something that didn't sound like a prayer. When she noticed me, she covered the glass with a towel and asked for water. Her hands shook, not from age, but from listening too hard. Father spent more time outside again. He said the soil needed turning. Each night he dug in a new corner of the yard, then filled it back before dawn. The shovel left clean scars in the grass. He wouldn't say what he was looking for. When I asked, He said it was better to move the dirt before it moved itself. Grandmother's cough began after the third rain. It was a dry sound, like fabric tearing. Mother sat beside her with a bowl of warm water and eucalyptus leaves. Steam rose, hung, and never reached the ceiling. She said she dreamed of rivers, but when she woke, her hands smelled of soil instead of medicine. I stopped drawing. The pencils snapped too easily. The paper wrinkled even when dry. At night I stayed on the stairs where I could see both hallways, the one to my sister's room, the one to grandmother's. They met in a corner that light never reached. Sometimes a shape moved there, too tall to be anyone from our house, but slow, like someone walking through water. When I blinked, it was gone, and both doors were still closed. Grandmother started talking to someone we couldn't see. At first, we thought she was praying. Then we noticed the pattern. Always after 3 a.m., always facing the window, always whispering the same line. She said she was being called. Father told her to rest, to stop frightening the children. She smiled at him in a way I'd never seen. Polite, distant, already halfway gone. One morning she didn't answer when Mother brought breakfast. Her eyes were open, fixed on the corner of the ceiling, mouth slightly parted as if listening. Her pulse was there, but faint, like it was waiting for permission to leave. The doctor came. He said the body can linger after the mind has left. He didn't explain where it goes. That night, Mother burned incense even though she didn't believe in it. Father sat outside under the dead porch light. Rain began again, soft and steady. I heard him mutter that the ground was too soft to hold anything. When I looked out the window, I saw water rising between the pines, pooling near the roots, dark and unmoving. At dawn, the house went quiet. No breath, no ticking, no dripping. Mother found her first, still in bed, eyes half closed as if mid-sentence. We didn't cry. The silence didn't allow it. The undertaker came late in the afternoon. He said the soil was too wet for a burial. They would keep her elsewhere until the ground settled. He left footprints on the steps that never dried. That night, I dreamed she was sitting in the yard. She wore the same dress, the same gray hair pulled tight, her hands folded on her lap. She looked toward the house but didn't move. Behind her, the pines leaned inward as if listening. When I woke, her room was empty, but the towel had slipped from the mirror. The glass faced the ceiling again, catching no reflection, only a flicker of something that moved without light. Mother said we should keep the room closed for a while. Father locked it. Still, the smell of damp earth seeped through the floorboards. Every step upstairs left a faint print, and by morning the prints had shifted, turning toward the stairs. No one mentioned it. We ate breakfast in silence. My sister counted the taps coming from the attic. They matched grandmother's last breaths almost perfectly. When night came, I waited for the house to exhale. It didn't. The air stayed still, heavy, expectant. In the dark, I heard something small roll across the floor above me. A mirror, maybe, finding its own place to rest. After the funeral, the house turned quieter than before. Not empty, just waiting. The smell of soil lingered in the hallway even after the windows were opened wide. Father said the scent came from the garden, from the rain that wouldn't stop, but the air felt thicker inside than out, like we were breathing through someone else's lungs. Mother kept the upstairs door locked. The key hung from a nail beside the pantry, but no one touched it. She said the lock was enough. Each night she checked it twice, her fingers trembling as she turned the metal. Sometimes I thought I heard a faint sigh from the other side, as if the wood exhaled when she stepped away. Father's hands changed color, darker around the nails, cracked from digging. He said the ground was still too wet to settle. When I looked from the window, I saw the same hole appear and vanish. Soil turned and turned again, as though something underneath refused to stay buried. He never looked up when I called to him. My sister stopped leaving her room. Her eyes followed invisible movement, tracing lines across the walls. She said she could hear breathing in the vent, steady, shallow, not hers. I pressed my ear against the metal and heard nothing but a faint warmth, like the sound of a distant tide. Still, she begged me not to close it. She said it stopped only when she listened. At night, the taps returned. Not from the attic this time, but the floorboards below my bed. Slow, deliberate, like someone counting. 3 knocks, pause, 3 again. Always the same pattern. When I whispered to Mother, she said I was dreaming. Then the knocks started under her chair. Father blamed plumbing. He tore up a section of the kitchen tiles, pried open the boards. No pipes, just packed earth, dark and damp, smelling of rust. He covered it again without speaking. That night the sound moved to the hallway. Mother began talking to herself, or maybe to the house. She'd stand at the sink and whisper under her breath, hands submerged in cold water long after the dishes were clean. Her lips formed the same words over and over. I won't listen. I won't look. Then she'd blink hard, as if trying to remember where she was. The next morning she told Father the house was echoing things that hadn't been said. He told her not to repeat them. She nodded, though her eyes drifted toward the locked door upstairs. The key wasn't on the nail anymore. No one mentioned it. Rain started again that evening. Wind pressed against the windows, but never broke them. The curtains swayed once, then froze mid-air. The smell of earth thickened until breathing hurt. When the light flickered, I saw something in the reflection. Just an outline, taller than the doorway, motionless. When the light steadied, it was gone. My sister called out from her room. Her voice was calm, almost curious. She said someone was sitting on the edge of her bed, too heavy to see. When we ran in, the sheets were smooth, the air still warm where the weight had been. She smiled, said maybe it was grandmother checking in. Father told her not to say that again. That night she came down to the kitchen, pale and slow. She walked as though she were underwater, each step delayed by something unseen. She stopped in front of me, opened her mouth, and blood touched her chin before the sound did. It came out soft, almost polite, then kept coming. Her knees gave way, and she fell against the table. Her eyes stayed on mine, wide, wet, unblinking. Mother screamed her name only once. Then she ran to hold her, hands shaking too hard to be useful. Father called for help, though the phone made no sound. It clicked once, like someone breathing into the line, then went dead. We carried her to the car. The rain stopped as soon as we reached the road. At the hospital, they said she was lucky. She'd lost a lot of blood, but her pulse was strong. They kept asking about what she might have taken. Father said nothing. Mother wept without tears, her lips pale from biting. The doctors found traces of something corrosive. Not poison exactly, just wrong. They asked if we used pesticides, cleaning chemicals, anything stored in metal. Father shook his head. He said we used nothing but soap. When she woke, my sister looked at all of us like we were strangers. She asked where she was, then who we were. Her voice sounded like it came from a long hallway. Mother said her name. She didn't answer. The doctors said memory loss sometimes follows trauma. They told us to take her home when she was ready. That night, Father stayed outside again, digging. I watched from the window until I couldn't tell if the shadow in the yard was his or someone else's. The hole filled with water before he finished. When he looked up, the porch light flickered, and for a moment I thought I saw 2 faces staring back, his and one just beside it. The same height, the same shape, but smiling. We left the next morning for a neighbor's house. Father said it was temporary, just until repairs were done. Mother didn't argue. We took nothing but clothes. When we locked the door, the latch didn't catch. It clicked once and then opened again, as if the house refused to let us go. From the neighbor's window, I could see our yard. The soil uneven, one pine leaning. The upper window still lit, though no one had left the lamp on. Rain returned by evening, washing the dirt flat. Father stared at it for a long time, whispering something I couldn't hear. No one slept. The neighbor's dog barked at nothing facing our yard. Near midnight, it went silent. Then, one short yelp. We found it the next morning at the fence line, paws caked in mud, eyes wide open. Between them, a clump of earth still wet. Something glimmered inside it. A piece of metal, maybe a hinge, maybe part of the key that had gone missing. Mother said not to touch it. Father picked it up anyway. His hand bled where the rust had bitten through. He stared at the yard, at the space beneath the leaning pine. The ground there had sunk slightly, forming a shallow depression. He said he would fix it tomorrow. He never did. That night I dreamed of the yard again. But this time, the soil moved on its own, shifting as if exhaling. And in that breath, I heard the same 3 knocks I'd learned by heart. Only now they came from outside, right beneath the window. By morning the yard was a sheet of gray water. The pine leaned further, roots showing like ribs. Father didn't come in for breakfast. The chair he used sat pulled from the table, its legs wet from the soles of his boots. Mother watched the window instead of eating. Every time the wind moved the glass, her eyes followed the sound. The neighbor's dog started barking again. Short bursts, then silence, then a single, low growl. When it stopped, the yard held still, as if the world was waiting for another sound to follow. It didn't. Hours folded into each other. Light slipped behind the clouds. Rain came without falling. When Father finally went outside, he didn't take the shovel. He stood over the soft ground and pressed his hand into it, fingers sinking easily. He said the soil was breathing. No one answered. By noon, he was gone. No note, no footprints, only the door left ajar. The air smelled of iron again, sharp enough to sting. Mother told me to stay inside. She paced the hallway, whispering to herself, counting 1, 2, 3, always stopping before 4. When she reached the locked door upstairs, she turned the handle once, then let it go. The click echoed longer than it should have. The dog barked again, closer this time. I went to the porch. It stood by the leaning pine, paws dark with mud, digging fast. Each movement threw up damp earth that shone like ash. Something wooden began to appear. Edges, corners, the hint of a lid. The smell thickened, sour and sweet, all at once. I called for Mother. She didn't come. The dog stopped suddenly and backed away, whining. The ground shifted, caving inward. A hollow sound followed, like air being released after years of holding its breath. The box broke open at one corner. Inside, the mud was darker than the rest, heavier, almost alive. I stepped closer. There was fabric first, then what looked like hair, long and gray, still clinging to shape. A hand lay just beneath, fingers curled as if still gripping something. The skin was pale, untouched by rot, soft as wax. It faced upward, palm open. Rainwater filled it slowly, drop by drop, until it overflowed. Mother screamed before I could. She pulled me back, her nails cutting into my arm. We watched the water run from the hand into the soil, disappearing between roots that no longer belonged to trees. The dog barked once and ran. Mother covered her mouth, shaking her head. She didn't look away. Neither did I. Later, the police came, though I don't remember calling them. They covered the yard with tarps, measured, wrote, whispered. One of them asked how long we'd lived here. Mother couldn't answer. Another asked if we'd ever noticed the ground sinking before. Father's name never came up. They lifted the box out by its corners. It came apart easily, wood soaked through. Someone said it must have been buried for decades, maybe longer. No one could explain the condition of the hand. They sealed it in plastic, labeled it, and carried it away. The hole stayed open, filling with water again before they finished. That night, Mother packed. She didn't tell me where we were going. The house was quiet, but not empty. When I passed the window, I thought I saw movement. Not outside, but in the reflection. The shape of someone leaning toward the glass from behind me. The front door closed once, then again, though no one touched it. As we walked away, the porch light flickered once and died. Behind us, the rain started again, steady, patient, washing over the open ground, softening the edges of the hole until there was no sign that anything had ever been there at all.